All right, thanks for having me. So question, why is the U.S. Study Center here? Why are we even relevant to this discussion whatsoever? As he said, we did a report on this. It was actually our first report we came out with last year. And it was our first major report in the Innovation Entrepreneurship Program, which I'm a part of, but also our first look at ag tech. Now, the thing with ag tech is it was new to us, but we saw it in the Innovation Entrepreneurship team as a unique opportunity for Australia. And we wanted to look at the VC side of it. So we have on our staff, by the way, this report, I'm one of, I think, 5 co-authors. The lead author, in many ways, was this visiting fellow we have on our staff named Spencer Maughan, who you may have heard of. He's an Australian VC guy now in Silicon Valley. And his venture capital firm focuses on specifically ag tech. And he has a PhD from here and has worked here, but also is now mainly in Silicon Valley. And we wanted to look at this future opportunity for Australia. And we saw it sort of as a case study on Australia's broader goals in being an innovation superpower. So to get started, how do you define ag tech? We decided to take the pitch book approach, which is, I guess, a bit more VC focused. And there are 2 options, though, mainly, in terms of who's looked at ag tech investment. And there's Ag Funder, which includes everything from the biosciences to even the food delivery services like Marley Spoon. And there's PitchBook, which is a bit stricter in our opinion, and we thought a bit more relevant, so we took that approach. And then this is sort of the definition and areas of where we saw that ag tech going, just quickly. I want to get to the main point. What I want to cover today, on the whole, though, is how Australia compared to the rest of the world, characteristics of Australia's investment into ag tech, what does it look like, and then some investor sentiment. We did that, by the way, in the multifaceted approach. We did open source research, we did case studies, and we did in-depth interviews. And so this is one of my favorite data points here, and this is in many ways what has continued to get sort of coverage. When you look at ag tech investment in Australia compared to the rest of the world, you can see agriculture's contribution to GDP here is 2.43%. In the US, 1.43%. Israel lower, sorry, in the US, 1.01%. Canada, 1.43%. Israel even lower. Everyone is lower in terms of some interesting peer competitors of Australia. Yet, ag tech investment per capita, you can see how much lower it is compared to the US and elsewhere. And this is one thing that I think is the main message, and I think rightfully has gotten the main headlines for why this is a bit controversial, in that ag tech is in many ways Australia's innovation future. We see that, but the investment is not there yet. And we've talked about earlier in the great panel before, I was talking about risk and capital. And I can't really speak on risk. I'm not an expert in agriculture. I just look at the numbers. But in terms of capital, that is just the beginning of the story here. We think, or I think, not all capital is created equal. You can have capital that is sophisticated capital that can really help you scale. So when you bring a VC firm, like you bring an expert from a VC firm with ag expertise, they can help you scale probably a bit better than a government bureaucrat who is just trying to plug holes and make sure everything is going the way it should, and they're not exactly the most profit-oriented. So this is sort of the main takeaway, if I had to highlight anything for this report, the difference between per capita ag tech investment versus the rest of the world. And just to put that in context, we are the U.S. Study Center, so I want to show just how comparable Australia is. Population of Texas, similar to Australia's. Texas's GDP is a bit bigger, but in terms of ag tech VC investment, Australia's at the same level as Connecticut. I was born in Connecticut. Not many people know Connecticut outside of America. Pretty small state, And it's pretty telling just how far Australia's agtech VC investment has to go. Now, this is, when you go one step further beyond the sort of not all capital is created equal story, this is what I think is really telling of where Australia's agtech investment is coming from. You can see the difference between the global markets and Australia here, and $1 million or less. That's traditionally in the VC world called seed funding. That's something you start when you're like, to make the tech equivalent, you're Google and you're just in a garage tinkering with your computer and you just need to keep the lights on, maybe get some server costs. You're not scaling anytime soon. You're just, trying to work things out. It's when you go above $1 million, when you get to Series A, B, and C, that's when you're scaling. That's when you're getting to what we're hearing now about Lyft in the US or Uber. You're talking about tens of millions of dollars. The challenge in Australia is that most of the funding in ag tech is $1 million or less. You can see the difference here where it's just not scaling. And now the challenge that we saw and what we think posit is that Australia is not globally oriented enough. It is not scaling to the point, or Australian ag tech, I should say. It's not scaling enough to the point to get the Series A funding, to get the Series B funding, to go to the next level. And so while there are a number of ag tech investments, as you can see here in the red, they're pre-seed. They're not even seed, you could say. And definitions of seed versus Series A, they vary by a bunch of different folks, but I think it's pretty healthy to say $1 million or less is seed or pre-seed. Now, this is another great stat. You can see the number of investments and how fast they've increased recently. The thing is, though, is when you look at the mean value of those investments, they're decreasing. There's more activity, but it's not the right activity. It's not hitting the levels that you want. When you look at the trajectory of US ag tech, Australian, or Kiwi ag tech, Israeli ag tech, it's both numbers of deals and those values are going up. But the mean value is decreasing in Australia. And so here, again, you can see the number of deals are significantly higher in just a short amount of time, which is great. But they're not the type of deals that you want to scale and to go overseas, to become a world player, and to become an ag tech superpower or an agricultural superpower, for that matter. One thing that I should note is there's also a lot of accelerators and incubators here, which is great, but as I hope this isn't too controversial, being a government-sponsored thing, but it's something, we've noticed incubators and accelerators are great ribbon-cutting ceremonies when you open them for government politicians. That doesn't mean that they're actually getting the results. So we posit that the Australian government is very active and it's laudable for its actions in ag tech, but the private sector needs to take the lead now. And it's not, you don't need more incubators or accelerators necessarily. You need more private, sophisticated capital to really expand the Australian ag tech potential. Similar story here, when you look at the types of fundings in terms of amount. You can look at government grants and mixed syndicate, so a mix of grants, and then just see how small the incubator accelerator amount is. So you can see the amounts by the government are not huge, and private sector is pretty sizable, but it's the deals. The deals are just increasing, and it's all government-led. And in terms of where the investment is coming from, is it coming from overseas? Is it a local investor? And you can see 7% foreign investors. This is Q1 2005 to Q1 2018. So Australia is not attracting the sort of foreign expertise that it needs to scale and become a global ag tech superpower, which again, we think it has the potential to. And by the way, New Zealand is. If you talk to any of the VC firms in Silicon Valley who specialize in ag tech, they're coming to New Zealand regularly now. They're coming to New Zealand more often than they are coming to Australia. So, where is Australian ag tech focusing? And it is focusing a lot in farm management, software, and sensing, and Internet of Things, and it's completely the reverse from the rest of the world. It's not focusing in the biotech. It's not focusing in the other sciences that the rest of the world is focusing in. And you can see here in terms of comparing Australia versus global investments, where Australia is focusing and just how disproportionate farm management, software, sensing, and Internet of Things are. Now, again, you can download the report there, but some main conclusions I want to close with is we are the US Study Center, but by no means are we saying Australia should be or is potentially the US. I don't think that's relevant, and I don't think it's rational to say. You can learn from the US, but I don't think Australia is anywhere close to the US or should try to replicate it. It's a sort of unique circumstances there that allowed it to grow it the way it did. And that said, I'm so glad that the other speakers today mentioned the Netherlands and Israel, both countries, and New Zealand. All three countries, smaller population than Australia, but far more globally oriented and far more globally ambitious, to be honest. And so how does Australia become more globally oriented and globally ambitious? There's a bunch of different ways to cut at that, and one is culture. We mentioned earlier, I think Emma mentioned earlier about the tall poppy syndrome, and yeah, you need to not be afraid to be ambitious, but at the same time, there are other approaches to become more globally oriented, and one is, and this is something for government, welcoming major ag tech or agricultural firms to Australia to do more R&D here. This is well known in innovation literature. They're called anchor firms. When Google comes to Australia, there are all sorts of spin-off firms from the employees who were at Google. They learn expertise from the cutting-edge major firm like Google, and then they're like, all right, we don't want to work in a large firm anymore. We see this little niche thing that we want to go out and venture on our own and do. We think the same approach could be done with more R&D if you bring more R&D from the Monsantos, Bayers, or even John Deere. If there could be more R&D here, that'd be great, by leading world ag tech firms. And then if you could also, if the government would maybe consider more engagement with foreign VC firms. This is another story from Israel. I grew up between the US and Israel, and I grew up next to Intel, actually, in Haifa in the north. And they were there from the 80s. And it was a deliberate decision by the Israeli government to welcome foreign firms. So more importantly, the Israeli government, under the Yamza program, they welcomed foreign capital with tax incentives. And now Australia has more venture capital per capita than anywhere else in the world. And you're wondering, oh yeah, sure, but how sustainable is that? Well, Australia turned off those incentives. They incentivized the foreign venture capital. Now they came to Israel and they stayed in Israel. So it's not something that you keep forever. So those are just a few of the recommendations we have, but I look forward to getting more questions. Thank you.